Imagine this living inside of you, crawling through your veins and embedding itself into your brain, where it dies. That is what happened to Scott Hessler when he ate a salad near where he worked in Hana as a pastry chef.
This whole thing boils down into a very simple thing. I had lunch, and then I went back to work, and it wasn't long before I started to have a lot of symptoms, very strange symptoms, and ended up in the hospital.
Scott Hessler was infected with rat lungworm from dirty produce.
It's very painful. You get lots of muscle pains. It migrates to your brain, so you're going to get all kinds of nervous symptoms, and there's no treatment for it. What has to happen is you simply wait for the parasite to die in your body.
Here's how the CDC explains rat lungworm. It's caused by parasitic worms called Angiostrongylis cantonensis. The worms live in the lungs of a rat. An infected rat coughs up worms from the lungs into the throat, where they are then swallowed by the rat. The worms are now in the rat's digestive system and end up in the rat's fecal matter. Then a slug or a snail eats the rat's fecal matter and becomes infected, or the worms penetrate a slug or snail's body. That snail or slug, often tiny, embeds itself on lettuce or other produce. If the produce is cleaned, it's no problem. But when it's not cleaned, someone like Scott Hessler eats it and becomes infected himself. The worms crawled through Scott's body and died in his brain.
I didn't feel good, and then I started to vomit, and I vomited, and I'll feel better, but I didn't feel better, and I kept vomiting for about 8 hours.
The infection nearly killed Scott Hessler. It left him impaired mentally and physically. Look at his brain. The green and blue in this imagery represents dramatically reduced blood flow. This isn't a recreation. It was generated by a brain scan conducted on Scott Hessler.
To see him decline so fast in his mental health ways is just really depressing for me, because to see it happen so fast, I feel like he aged almost 20 years, within 2 years.
It was a neurotoxin reaction from these worms that apparently had gotten into my stomach through eating, and no one knew at the time that had been the case, but that's what it was, and these neurotoxins put me in the hospital.
The source of Scott Hessler's salad was Hana Fresh. This receipt proves what no one denies. Hana Fresh provided all produce to the Travasa Hotel, where Hessler worked as a pastry chef and ate his meals.
Hana Fresh was the only supplier of fresh greens to that hotel. So the only way he got it was by eating greens produced at Hana Fresh.
And Hana Fresh knew its produce was dangerous. Its medical clinic director, Dr. Curtis Beckham, told board members that the produce wasn't safe, but nothing was done. He's a whistleblower in this case.
So I've seen a lot of repeat food contamination at the produce there, like I said, slugs and everything else. And my friends would go there too. They would say the same thing. We would try to, wash them off.
Dr. Beckham says he gets upset every time he thinks about what Scott Hessler is enduring. Hessler, a respected professional baker, is now largely confined to his small, government-subsidized apartment. He wants to bake, but can't. He can't be trusted with an oven or a stove.
He has been baking his whole life. He knows how his recipes for baking overall, but now he has to look back at his recipe book for measurements and stuff, which he never did before. He always was really sharp in that manner. And he forgets things now, he forgets to turn off the oven, which worries me, which was never a problem before. So now I always go over every day after work and check on him, make sure everything, the lights, switches are correct, the ovens is off, and everything is overall his daily life activities. I just double check everything to make sure, help him and make sure everything's overall in a normal state for him.
My most comfortable position is staying home without a lot of tight clothing. because my neurological system is, my nerves have been tampered with, and it don't feel real good right now.
Rat lungworm is so gruesome, it's featured in this Discovery TV documentary called Monsters Inside Me. It's so debilitating, so deadly, that the Hawaii Department of Health is constantly warning farms like Hana Fresh to stop at nothing to prevent it because of what it can do.
Rat lungworm disease can cause things like paralysis, coma, and in severe cases, death.
But when the Department of Health tried to inspect Hana Fresh after Scott Hessler's infection, government workers were turned away.
All the other farms, Ona farms, Hana farms, they all demanded when rat lungworm was hitting that the state health department come onto their farms and inspect it and say, please help us. What can you do to help us? Can you tell us if we have it? What can we do to get rid of it?
But not Hana Fresh.
All these places that hurt with me seem to just have started when them worms got into my system.
Medically, Scott Hessler suffered a blood infection, nearly fatal atrial fibrillation, and he was paralyzed for nearly 2 months in excruciating pain. Once released from the hospital, Scott Hessler was no longer able to care for himself without supervision. He wants to work, but couldn't even hold a job in a bakery at a supermarket. Vocational specialist Marsha Berkowitz writes, Mr. Hessler is extremely limited in options for returning to the workforce, and in my opinion, will not be able to find or sustain gainful employment given the disabilities resulting from his contracting rat lungworm disease.
He just feels so lost with all the things he used to do to what he can do today. And, you know, he tries really hard, but now that the years have passed, we've really learned, like, we've been able to more figure out, like, where his weaknesses and where his strengths are, and we're learning to accept his, permanent disabilities that we're dealing with today.
And much like an amputee suffers from phantom pain, Scott Hessler says he lives with the constant feeling that parasitic worms are inching through his veins. Once you know it happened, it's difficult for your brain to believe that it stopped.
You can feel them collecting in your joints, it seemed to me, and I could really get a lot of pain right up here in my side of my neck, where they still is to this day, where you could almost feel their incredible journey, where they're going, where they're headed.
Scott Hessler will never be the same, and he's only in his 60s.
He taught me most of everything. So for him to see him decline so fast in his mental health ways is just really depressing for me.
There is no other side of the story. When Hana Fresh sold contaminated produce to the Travasa Hotel, it guaranteed that someone would be infected. That someone is Scott Hessler, who will now spend the rest of his life wondering what his life could have been.